Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're cutting straight through the noise to look at the invisible architecture of your life. We have some really powerful material here that suggests real, lasting personal freedom.
Hmm.
It isn't just about changing your habits. It's about
Yeah.
identifying and severing these unseen cords that bind your identity and, limit your joy. Okay, let's unpack this. We're embarking on a mission focused on unlocking wholeness by identifying and breaking two powerful limiting forces these sources call soul ties and self-curses.
Hmm.
This material approaches personal freedom as both a deep spiritual reality and a set of practical, intentional steps you can implement today.
And if we want that freedom, we really have to start with the foundation.
Okay.
And that's the concept of your original design. We hear that phrase a lot, but what the material emphasizes is the inherent power of knowing exactly who you were created to be.
Right, absent of all the external noise.
Exactly, absent of societal pressures, family expectations, or, your past mistakes.
That sounds good in theory, but for the listener, how do we define that practically? Is original design just like finding your purpose, or is it something deeper?
Oh, it's much deeper. It's your identity pre-distortion. Think of it this way. Your purpose flows out of your design.
Okay, so design first, then purpose.
That's it. The sources strongly encourage, intentionally speaking, this truth over yourself and, this is critical, over the next generation. We saw an example of a family writing out the original design for their children and grandchildren, essentially giving them a standard to live up to.
The truth of who they are.
The truth of who they are before the world can tell them who they aren't.
And the result of that kind of consistent declaration, I mean, what does that actually do?
It creates a reality. The Thorse mentioned a 13-year-old granddaughter who was already walking in her design.
Wow.
Not because she's perfect, but because the truth of her identity has been consistently affirmed by an authority figure who believes in her. That belief carries immense weight.
Moving from identity, the sources frame forgiveness as the second pillar of freedom, but with a surprising twist. It's not presented as a, touchy-feely emotional release.
Not at all. It's framed as a supernatural act. The material stresses that biblical forgiveness is not something achievable purely through human strength or willpower.
So you can't just grit your teeth and decide to forgive.
No, if you wait until you feel ready, you'll probably never get there.
Yeah.
It has to be enabled by a supernatural grace.
There's a profound story in the material that illustrates this need for radical grace. The speaker shared that 2 decades ago he prayed, "God, let me see my sin the way you see it."
Right.
What was the consequence of that seemingly simple request?
It was what he called the best, worst thing that ever happened to him. He spent 5 days face down, unable to eat.
5 days.
5 days. Just completely overwhelmed by the gravity of his own wrongdoing. And this act completely shattered his previous worldview on grace.
I can imagine.
But here's the crucial insight. That profound awareness of how much grace he received is what prepared him, years later, to minister effectively to the deeply marginalized, the homeless, the addicted.
Ah, okay.
When you see the massive price tag of your own forgiveness, the price tag of forgiving others suddenly looks a lot smaller.
That realization alone is transformative. But if we can't find that profound emotional breakthrough, the sources provide a third reason for forgiveness, that is.
Well, it's entirely non-negotiable.
It's a command. Exactly. We need to forgive because we are commanded to do so.
It's that simple.
It is. This is where the concept of the fear of God comes in, not as dread, but as profound respect for the Creator. When we stand alone, we won't be able to say, "I would have lived a better life except for the person who hurt me."
You can't use someone else as an excuse.
Never. Our judgment rests solely on our own obedience or lack thereof. The point is to make the decision ahead of time, like Jesus did. "Father, not my will, but yours." Obedience over sentiment. That's the key to personal accountability. All right, here's where it gets really interesting for me. If forgiveness is the foundation, then the primary tactic used to undo that foundation is something called a soul tie.
Mm-hmm.
Let's define this clearly for the listener. What exactly is a soul tie?
A soul tie is essentially an unhealthy emotional bond. It's created when you partner with another person in sin or even just an unhealthy emotional behavior.
So it's a counterfeit.
It's a counterfeit of God's healthy soul bond, the marital relationship where two become one. The enemy, hating that true design, creates these counterfeits to entangle our hearts, and that robs us of wholeness.
So what does that entanglement actually look like in everyday life? How would someone know they have one?
It manifests primarily in 2 ways: fear of man and inordinate control.
Fear of man. So caring too much what people think.
Precisely. It means your heart is complicated, it's unavailable to God, unavailable to your spouse, and unavailable to the life you're supposed to live. If you struggle with chronic confusion, or if you're constantly seeking external approval, you need to check for these ties.
You're giving away emotional authority.
You are.
The examples provided are highly practical. Let's start with maybe the most insidious one, the confusion of the marital bond.
Yeah, this one is. It illustrates the violation of the biblical principle of leaving and cleaving.
Right.
The example was a newlywed husband who called his mother every single night for an hour.
An hour every night.
Every night. To share his day and his deepest feelings because, in his words, she's the only one who understands me.
Oh, wow.
He was cleaving emotionally to his mother instead of his wife. While he thought he was honoring his parent, he was misdirecting his deepest emotional bond, which the material argues will inevitably jeopardize the marriage.
That makes the tie a matter of emotional boundary failure. We also saw an example of this happening in the workplace, even after the relationship is terminated.
Yes, the story of the woman who left an abusive boss but couldn't escape his influence. She found herself struggling in her new job, constantly feeling like she was, and this is her phrase, living in the other person's head. She carried his standards, his criticism, his fear into her new environment.
So that emotional tie was still active.
It was still active and draining her joy, even though she hadn't spoken to him in months.
So if the tie is purely emotional or mental, what does the practical breaking look like? For the listener, the language of calling back the part of your soul might seem a little abstract. What's the emotional shift they should expect?
That is the essential question. The spiritual exercise involves repentance for your part in the relationship that created the tie, but the active step is declaring the severance.
Okay.
When we talk about calling back the part of your soul you gave away, we are talking about intentionally reclaiming your emotional boundaries and your identity,
And sending back their part.
and simultaneously sending back the part of the other person that is living in your mind. Their standards, their criticism, their expectations. The practical outcome is immediate clarity and a sense of emotional wholeness and availability.
That's a powerful translation. But what about the unavoidable ties? You can't just delete your family member or your boss from your life.
For those, the instruction is very specific. You pray against the fear of man and the inordinate control associated with that relationship.
So you attack the symptom, not the person.
Exactly. You can't necessarily delete the person, but you must renounce the power they hold over you emotionally. You have to announce, even just to yourself, I'm not going to live in his head anymore.
The sources even integrate the idea of strong cultural structures, like hierarchical cultures, into this discussion. Does that change the freedom principle?
Not at all. It might make the cultural pressure stronger, but the principle remains the same, freedom from the fear of man.
Huh.
The model is Jesus standing before Pontius Pilate.
Okay.
Pilate claimed secular authority, but Jesus clarified, you would have no power except what is given by my Father above. This principle lets us be respectful of culture and hierarchy. We can still honor the structure, but without allowing it to cause fear or moral compromise or dictate our core identity.
So, what does this all mean? We've discussed the external ties, but the sources emphasize that the second major limiting force is internal. The power of our own words,
Right.
framing them as curses and blessings.
A curse is defined very simply here as anything spoken absent of God's authority and love, anything that seeks harm, diminishment, or limitation. God's mandate is for us to be blessers, actively choosing to speak life, even to those who curse us.
And the most dangerous application of this is the self-curse. Words spoken over oneself, even in frustration, like, I'm so stupid, or I'm never going to succeed. Why do those unintentional words carry so much authority?
Because they come from you, and you have inherent authority over your own life. The material stresses that the enemy is listening and is actively using those self-imposed limitations.
So you're giving authority to the very thing that seeks to diminish you.
You are.
We have a dramatic example here of the physical consequences of the self-curse. Tell us about the man who stood at his wife's memorial.
This man had been diagnosed with fatal prostate cancer and was given only months to live. When he sought prayer, the team received the word self-curse.
Just self-curse.
And they realized that just 2 months before his diagnosis, consumed by grief at his wife's funeral, he had declared in front of his whole family, it should have been me.
He had spoken death over himself.
Literally.
And the immediate physical result after he repented and renounced those specific words.
It's incredible. He had a medical procedure scheduled, and the doctors tried repeatedly to take a biopsy to confirm the severity. It failed 6 times.
6 times.
6. On the 7th attempt, the technician realized the tests were actually wrong. He'd been healed. He's now lived 16 years past that initial prognosis.
Wow, that's dramatic, measurable evidence of the power of words, both to limit and to liberate.
It is.
The good news is that if we can create a curse, we can break a generational pattern simply by choosing to bless.
Absolutely. It is never too late to start. The speaker, who grew up never hearing a blessing, simply prayed, "Lord, teach me how to bless my children."
And in that act,
In that act of intentional choice, he broke that generational pattern. We have to choose life, as commanded in Deuteronomy 30, and deliberately use what the material calls heaven's vocabulary to change the atmosphere wherever we go.
we've covered the foundational principles and the tools. Now let's talk about activation. The sources insist we must transition from merely consuming this knowledge to actively participating in this model.
Yes, this is the shift from student to practitioner. The model is called prophetic encouragement. And it's important to note, it is explicitly not a counseling model or a teaching model. It's focused action.
And there is a very strict measurement standard for what information we share with others, which I assume this helps prevent confusion or self-interest from creeping in.
Precisely. It's based on 1 Corinthians 14.3. Any insight or revelation must fit 3 criteria.
Right.
Does it strengthen? Does it encourage? Does it comfort?
Strengthen, encourage, comfort.
Yes. If the information you receive doesn't meet those standards, you must hold it, or you must discard it. It keeps the focus pure.
This brings us to the difficulty of discerning which voice we are hearing when we get an unexpected prompting.
We use a process of elimination because we hear 3 voices. Our own, which is typically self-centered.
Yeah.
The enemy's, which is self-centered and destructive. And God's, which is always about blessing and comfort. If the thought brings blessing and comfort and is focused on someone else's freedom, it is highly unlikely to be the first 2.
I love the coffee shop test anecdote that confirms the need to check that voice against the standard.
Yeah, that was a great story. The speaker was outside a coffee shop with 2 coffees when he heard a voice say, "Heal her foot," referring to a woman on crutches.
And he immediately questioned it.
Immediately, is it me? No, my voice wants to drink my coffee. Is it the enemy? No, the enemy doesn't want anyone healed.
The confirmation request was key to ensuring humility, wasn't it?
Yes. He prayed, "Lord, if that's you, let her be the next one out of the door." And she was. So he knelt and prayed for her right there. It illustrates the point perfectly. You move in faith, but God gets the glory. The random, visible nature of the act prevents man from taking credit.
So for the listener who wants to activate this knowledge, what's the core mandate for interacting with others? What's the takeaway?
Move in the gifting you have without comparison. Romans 12.6 teaches us that. When working with others, focus only on praying the original design and praying for freedom from fear and unbelief.
So you're not trying to solve their whole life.
No, avoid praying about career decisions, marriage, or the future. Why? Because the best way to help someone make the right decisions is to first help them get the fear and confusion out of their life so they can step into their freedom and hear clearly for themselves.
This has been a true deep dive into actionable personal freedom. We've established that lasting freedom requires these intentional steps. Stepping out of the fear of man, breaking emotional entanglements, soul ties, renouncing negative internal words, self-curses, and intentionally speaking life and blessing. You have seen the dramatic power of words to create a curse, but you also carry the inherent authority to bless and influence the next generation starting today. So consider the environment you create for your family and community simply by the vocabulary you choose to use every day. Which atmosphere are you cultivating? Take these tools and apply them immediately to step fully into your original design.